Parents, have you ever heard anything creepy or unexplainable through your baby monitor? ConfessionBear.jpg. Okay, in early 1990, I worked for a volunteer-based security group. We didn't have a radio license for real walkie-talkies yet, so we had a set of headsets that worked off some common household frequencies. These frequencies were used for child's walkie-talkies, cheap cordless phones, drive-through speakers, baby monitors, and such. During an outdoor distance test, I picked up some lady's cordless phone where she talked about gross medical stuff, but she couldn't hear us to get her to stop. So while testing a battery replacement, I picked up a two-way baby monitor in a nearby apartment. There was a baby fussing and the sound of some woman doing dishes. "I'll be right there, Honorable," the woman said. On a whim, I pushed talk on my headset, and said with a loud, demonic voice, "Feed me." Then I heard the shattering of dishes. That was hilarious when I was 21, but after reading this, I feel bad. Frown. Sorry, lady stranger. I used to babysit two kids, and they each had a video monitor that picked up sound. I put them to bed and was sitting downstairs doing homework, and I thought they were both asleep because it had been like a half hour since I had put them in bed, and neither kid was shifting around anymore. It was silent except for their breathing through the monitors. It was pitch black outside and the parents wouldn't be home for another couple of hours. All of a sudden I heard a little kid's voice singing. I couldn't tell what the voice was saying, but it sounded really creepy. I looked at the monitors, and neither kid had moved. Went up to their rooms and checked on them both. Apparently the younger one, 3 years old, would sing to himself when he couldn't sleep, and his mom didn't tell me that. He was laying perfectly still singing softly, and I nearly shit myself when I heard it through the monitor. Edit. I can't format. I hate baby monitors. This thread confirms my suspicions that baby monitors are nothing but portals into hell. I was at a friend's house one night, and she was putting her little boy to bed. Her baby monitor had a camera built in and was installed at the foot of the crib. She also had one of those mattress sensors in the crib. Well, we are sitting down, watching a movie and the receiver for the monitor is on the coffee table in front of us. The sound sensor spikes and the screen goes white. She picks it up, and all you can make out on the screen is an eerie face. We go running into the room and her kid is sound asleep. We look around and don't see anything strange, so we go back to the movie. About 10 minutes later, the same thing happens. I get up quietly and sneak into his room, while she stays on the couch. I catch the kid standing up in his crib, with his face right up against the monitor. He is smiling like crazy and giggling. He looks over at me and quickly lays down and acts like he is asleep. I let her know what's up, and she laughs it off. A few nights later she tells me the same thing happened to the monitor, but her boy was sitting on the couch next to her, at the time. Hopefully this fits well enough because it was a baby monitor that set it off. Okay, so my daughter is now almost 2 and has long since moved into her own room. We have one of those video monitor things where you can see/hear the baby on this little TV thing, or you can turn the picture off and just get sound. So one night maybe a month ago I'm sitting in bed, scrolling through Reddit or something, and I start hearing my daughter babbling to herself. Now, it's really late, like 1 or 2 in the morning, much later than she is ever awake unless something is wrong and she is sick or cutting a tooth or something. So I turn the picture on the monitor on and see her standing up in her crib facing sort of diagonally away from the camera. I can see her hands in front of her but only like half of her face. Now is a good time to mention that we have been teaching her ASL since she was about 3 months old, and she has been responding and conversing in signs since about 10 months. I can see her signing things like nice and silly and fun, and oddly enough, no, don't like and bear. Of course, being the good and loving mother I am and really not wanting to deal with an overly sleepy baby in the morning, I get up to see what the heck she is doing. When I get to her room she is still standing up and signing/babbling towards the far corner of her room. I ask her what she is doing and who she is talking to, and she signs/says as best as she can, "Friend," which she does with her whole hands and not just her index fingers, and signs "bear" again. I tell her that no, see, Bear, who is actually one of her stuffed toys, is in bed behind her, not in the corner of the room, but she just giggles at me and signs/says silly and mommy. I can see she is wide awake, so I sit down in the rocker next to her bed and try to figure out what woke her up, but all she will tell me is "friend" and "bear," and occasionally duck down like she is hiding and making shh noises. I finally get fed up and ask her who friend Bear is, and her response literally gave me chills because she doesn't speak well yet, but she managed to say, very clearly and with the most serious face a 20-month-old can pull off, "No name, no name." Well, now I am well and truly freaked out, so I tell her to ask no name friend Bear to go home because it is too late to play, and I did what any good loving mother would do. I gave her a pacifier, went back to my room, turned off the monitor entirely and hid under the overs in my room where my good and loving husband would protect me from nameless invisible bears. Yes, it was creepy when it happened until I figured out what it was. I have a son and he wasn't even talking yet when I heard the alphabet sung by a girl through his monitor. It scared me and I went and got my sister and we sat there and heard it again. We live across the street from a daycare. It was creepy until I remembered that. Baby breathing heavy all of a sudden. That's the worst feeling. I don't have kids yet. But apparently when I was little my parents used to hear an indistinguishable mumbling coming from my room on a weekly basis that was blatantly a man's voice. These were the same nights as when my toys would turn on and start playing music in the middle of the night. I have no idea if this is true or not. But for as long as I knew her, my grandmother, she used to say that my grandfather, he passed away when I was just over a year old, was always watching over me. My parents told me of the ghost of the little white house when I was about 13 or 14. The whole conversation started with some talk of ghosts. I'm not exactly sure how, but it led to my mom telling me of the ghost nanny that I used to have as a baby. She told me that although I never cried much, the nights I would start crying they would awake to the crying over the baby monitor. This would be quickly followed by the sound of the rocking chair in my bedroom rocking and I would stop crying. She told me that they would often come into my room and find bottles that neither of them had given me. The creepiest story she told me was the story of my almost death. One of my grandmothers was supposed to be watching me because both my parents were at work, but she was doing something or left. Not a great grandmother. But I had apparently become wrapped up in my blanket and was beginning to suffocate. Well, about the same time my other grandmother, fantastic grandma, got this strange feeling that she needed to check on me, and apparently the feeling was so strong that she left work and came to the house to find me just in time that I didn't die. My mother surely believed in it and it was a pretty convincing story when she told it. At the end of the story, she told me that right before we moved into our new home, she thanked the ghost for all that it had done for the family and for keeping me safe. TL, Doctor, Ghost Nanny made me happy and saved my life. When my daughter was about 8 months old I was in her bedroom cleaning while she was playing in her crib. I had her monitor turned down. But when I noticed the red lights moving, signaling noise, I turned it up. I heard, plain as day, a child screaming something along the lines of "I'm sorry. No, please no." The worst part is that I could actually hear him being hit. Not slapped, but seriously beat. I lived in a heavily populated area of Pittsburgh, so there was no telling where this was happening. I grabbed my daughter and ran outside anyway, hoping to hear the child scream from an apartment or house so I could call the police. But I couldn't zero in on it. Such a horrible feeling, not being able to stop this poor child from being beat. I never looked at any of my neighbors the same. Till I am never buying a baby monitor, ever. Not in this life or the next. Fuck this thread. On a less creepy note, I was accidentally responsible for my boss hearing terrifying sounds through her kid's baby monitor. My boss's kid was born in 2005, and The Grudge was still kind of a big deal, especially with the sequel approaching. I taught the kiddo to make that creepy voice clicky sound. She liked to mimic, and it was pretty hilarious to hear her do it. Unfortunately, she decided to bust it out at around 1 o'clock in the morning at one point, and it terrified the crap out of my boss and her husband. I got "fuck you" texts in the early hours of the morning for like a month. And then again, when I taught her the chorus of "Never Gonna Give You Up." For a while there, it was a toss-up as to whether they'd wake up to creepy ghost sounds or annoying songs. They were less than pleased. Heard a strange hissing noise at 3:30 a.m. through the monitor and our movement pad went off. Walked into the room and he was fast asleep. He proceeded to wake up the next morning and tell me that for the last few sleeps he has been picked up and flown to a place in Ireland where his 6 brothers and sisters live. He's managed to name them and they remain the same each time I ask him about it. Safe to say me and his mother are slightly scared. This isn't something I heard from my kid's room, but it was something creepy heard over a baby monitor. I did at home care for a little while, and there was this one client I had a couple of years ago. The lady I assisted had dementia, and she was just at the point where the good days were fading. We had a baby monitor in her room so we could hear when she was waking up. I'll go ahead and mention that we also had bells pinned to her sheets so that when she was trying to get up on her own, fall risk, we would hear the bells jingle. It was common to hear her down in her room talking to that man, asking "Who are you? And what is it?" to an empty room. One evening her and I were in the living room together by ourselves, and I heard the bells start jingling on their own over the baby monitor. There was no ceiling fan, the AC/heat wasn't running, no windows were open. I always had bad feelings in her house, with things like cabinets opening and one really creepy time where it's sounding like footsteps coming down the hallway, which really scared me. I'm honestly glad I will never have to go into that house again. My dad told me this story about how one time I climbed out of the crib at about 18 months old and ordered a Happy Meal, fries, and a medium Pepsi from the baby monitor. Till that I would nope straight the fuck out of my house if shit went down in my kid's room. Father of the Year. Based on this thread alone, I have decided that before I have kids, I need to be rich so I can build a brand new house and hire a nanny to literally be with the baby 24/7. This way no dead grandpas can make noises in the kids' room and I don't have to deal with the little hell portals. Not me, but my grandmother tells this story pretty often whenever any sort of ghost conversation comes up. My parents moved into this old house in CT when my middle brother was a baby and my oldest brother was about 10. I was not born yet. The house was pretty haunted, to the point that to this day my oldest brother won't talk about it. After several weeks of finding him sleeping in the hallway outside my parents' door, they decided maybe he needed a little vacation. At this point my parents were in denial about their undead housemates, so they didn't mention my oldest brother's behavior to my grandmother, who agreed to watch my middle brother while my parents took him to Disney World. The first night my grandmother stayed at the house, she heard a woman talking about my brother through the monitor. Then she heard some faint singing. Wanting it to be something logical, my grandmother assumed she left the TV on in the bedroom. My brother's crib was in my parents' room. She went up there, no TV, no radio, just my infant brother laughing at absolutely nothing. My grandmother basically spent the rest of the week terrified, and wouldn't go back to our house after my parents returned. She had some other strange things happen, but notes the baby monitor talk as one of the scariest experiences she's ever had. My parents toughed out that house for about a year, until one day all the china came flying out of the china cabinet. My mom says she's never packed and gotten out of a house that fast. They stayed in a hotel until they sold it. TL, Dr. Grandmother heard a woman talking and singing to my brother. Family stayed in haunted house for far too long. My uncle has a handful of stories, but I'll tell one of the better ones. One night over the baby monitor, they heard whispering in what sounded like my cousin's voice. Strangely though, they heard another voice that sounded like my grandma's. She passed a year before this. They go into a room and asked her who she was talking to, and she says, "I was talking to Grandma. She helped me find my doll." The doll was on the floor, but when they checked on her it was in her crib. I could go on for a while with other stories if anyone is interested. He's got your baby. He's got your baby. He's got your baby. I'm so sorry. This post made me think of Insidious. Not my story, but my brother told me a few years ago he woke up in the middle of the night hearing his son crying his eyes out, then a low man's voice saying, "Shh, be quiet," then silence. He ran into the room and the baby was asleep and no one else around. Creeped me the fuck out. Why would I read this when I'm on the beach? Why am I writing on the beach? Why am I replying? WTF is going on? When my son was old enough to not need the monitor anymore, I was cleaning out his room and posting things to sell. Baby monitor was one of them. I had the receiver in my room, and the other end in my son's, but it was turned off. I turned on the receiver part first with the intention of going to my son's room to turn the other end on to see if it still works before I sell it. Well, when I switched it on, I heard another baby crying. Definitely not my son, as he was watching TV happily. I listened for a while thinking someone would come get him / her eventually. No one came the whole time. My heart broke for that baby. I could hear adults talking in the background, but not clear enough to hear exactly what they were saying. The baby would cry for 20 to 30 minutes, fall back to sleep, wake up, cry again for another while, go back to sleep, cry for an hour, sleep, over and over, with no signs of him / her being moved / picked up / spoken to / played with. Nothing. I wish I knew which house it was coming from. This was about 5 years ago, and I still couldn't figure out who it was. My daughter's toys coming on by themselves. When she was little, less than a year old, I've always blamed it on faulty batteries because that is what keeps me from pissing my pants. In high school, I would somewhat frequently watch my neighbor's 2 children in their enormous, 1850s-ish home. I never really thought of it as being too creepy, but sometimes my best friend would come with me if it was going to be a late night and we would watch movies once the kids were asleep. At one point, the owners of the house had rented a spare room to a family friend, but at this point that was no longer the case. When I came back in the living room from being in the kitchen, my friend said the tenant just got home, confirmed late with the parents that no one should have been there. It was creepy how nonchalantly she described him being there. My husband went upstairs to put my son to sleep. He came back down and we started watching a movie. The window was open and we could faintly hear our neighbor's dog barking 2 houses down. I look over at the video monitor, in night vision mode, and see my son standing up and a woman walk in and pick him up. He gladly went with her. I was just in disbelief. Told husband to go check. He went up there and kiddo was lying there like trying to sleep here. What's your deal? He came back down and we just kind of sat there dumbfounded until we heard the neighbor's dog barking again, but on the baby monitor in our son's room. Took us about an hour to finally realize they had the same monitor as us and we were watching their kid's room. My mom tells this story every time she gets the chance. We had the old baby monitors that all play on the same frequency, and one night she had laid me down for bed. After about an hour of me sleeping she hears a baby screaming and a man yelling. Then smack, screaming, smack smack, and more screaming. Turns out next door neighbor was beating the holy living shit out of his baby for crying and she recognized his voice. Called the cops and he was arrested on spot. Way to go, mom. One night, as my husband and I were getting into bed, the lights and television began to flicker. Our 6-month-old son was asleep in the next room, and we heard loud screaming coming from the monitor. With the power still cutting on and off, I went over to check on him only to find that he was sound asleep. I returned to our bedroom and I heard crying again through the monitor. At this point all the power on the top floor had cut out. Dutifully, I went back into the nursery assuming he had woken up again. He was still asleep. At this point I realized it wasn't him. "That's not our son," I said, gesturing to the monitor. At this point, we just stared at each other, exchanging our various WTFs. It's probably completely explainable, but we've never heard anything else through our monitor. Also, the nature of the power outage was strange and isolated to a couple of rooms. We later discovered it was a bad outlet in a room we use for storage. We also live next to a small cemetery. I'm glad I am using a secured Wi-Fi based AV monitor. I can see and hear fine, but no crossover signal unless someone hacks both my network and the monitor. Crap, now I'm worrying about that. Doctor, baby monitor got hacked. Probably some punk, which caused my staff sergeant and I to stage an armed assault on his daughter's bedroom. So apparently, baby monitors can get hacked. This was a few months back and I was at my staff sergeant's house. We were sitting in his living room, watching sports and discussing my future in the Marines. I had just gotten out of boot camp, and there's a baby monitor, audio only, sitting on the table. His newly born daughter of 2 weeks was in the room down the hall. As we're talking, a distorted voice announces that if he doesn't leave a large sum of money at the park on a bench, he will hurt his daughter. So naturally, both of us fearing for his newly born daughter's life, we scramble through his living room to the kitchen. He hands me his M4 and magazine and snatches a personal sidearm used for home defense from a drawer. We sprint down the hall, basically kicks the door off its hinges, and scan for any would-be intruders. Needless to say, there wasn't any, although his wife wasn't too pleased when she found out we staged an armed assault on her daughter. They ended up staying at a friend's house for a few days and got a new baby monitor. Edit. Contacted my staff sergeant about the M4. I assumed it was issued due to the fact he has been issued an M4 in lieu of the M16. He told me he had personally purchased it and is not government issued. His M4 is currently locked up in the armory at the Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia. My grandma has dementia and lives with my parents, siblings, and we had a baby monitor in her room in case she starts crying for mama or something. We don't use it anymore because she's not a baby and can use words. You also need to know that we had a TV mounted in her room so she can watch Wheel of Fortune and whatnot. Anyway, I had the monitor with me as I was doing stuff around the house and I'm keeping an ear on it, occasionally hearing Pat Sajak talk loudly, but it's too faint to hear anything else really. Eventually I'm in a routine of homework, video games, and then suddenly I hear a heavy breathing from the monitor, like, straight up serial killer calls you in the middle of the night and doesn't say anything breathing. This goes on for a solid 10 seconds and I am getting really worried. Within the next 10 seconds I run into a room to find a quit smoking propaganda ad running and breath a sigh of relief that no one, for whatever reason, was going to hurt my grandmother. I'm disappointed that I can't find the ad online, but if anyone wants to try it was for NY quits and it was just text on the screen with breathing. Reply if you find it. When my oldest sister was a baby, my mom had just put her down for a nap and went to wash dishes. She had the baby monitor on the counter by the sink. Her then husband was at work so she was home alone. After a while she heard a man's voice coming through, singing a lullaby. No one was in the nursery. This doesn't quite fit. But one time my friend and I were chilling in his garage, and his baby was asleep in his crib inside. Then we hear static from the baby monitor, followed by this really creepy, raspy voice whispering, "I've come for the child." Turns out it was just my friend's brother who had walked in the front door of the house. He had a key, and, upon realizing we were out in the garage, thought he'd freak us out a little. It worked. Not from a baby room, but I used to work in an intensive care group home, and one of my clients had a monitor in her room that we turned on when she was sleeping. We would occasionally hear voices from the family next door who apparently had the same monitor. It was creepy as fuck since all my clients were nonverbal. Till baby monitors are evil.